The sight of human male genitalia sent shockwaves through the Deltan delegation. Fenris, a young female Deltan xenobiologist, stood frozen on the Hawaiian beach, her pale blue skin flushing a deeper shade as she processed the alien anatomy before her. The bulges in the men's swim trunks were unlike anything in Deltan physiology, and their implications threatened to upend the entire cultural exchange program. Moments earlier, the sleek Deltan spacecraft had touched down on the designated landing zone, kicking up clouds of sand. As the ramp lowered, Dr. Robert Foster, Earth's leading xenoanthropologist, stepped forward to greet the hairless, blue-skinned visitors. The air was thick with humidity, causing visible discomfort among the Deltans as they emerged. "Welcome to Earth," Foster announced, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Dr. Robert Foster, head of the welcoming committee." The Deltan ambassador, Zorn, hesitated before grasping Foster's hand. "We appreciate your hospitality, Dr. Foster. I am Zorn, and this is our science officer, Fenris." Foster nodded to Fenris, noting her wide-eyed gaze as it swept across the beach. Human beachgoers in various states of undress milled about, some playing volleyball, others lounging on towels. The concept of recreational partial nudity was clearly foreign to the Deltans. Fenris, driven by scientific curiosity, broke away from the group and approached the volleyball players. Her steps faltered as she drew near, her eyes fixed on the men's lower bodies. Abruptly, she spun and hurried back to her delegation, whispering urgently to her colleagues. Foster, sensing something amiss, excused himself from the ambassador and made his way to Fenris. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Fenris hesitated, then leaned in close. "Dr. Foster, I've observed something unexpected about human males. There appears to be an additional appendage between their legs. Is this a common feature?" Foster's eyebrows shot up as he realized the magnitude of this misunderstanding. "Ah, yes. That's a fundamental aspect of human biology. I think we need to arrange an impromptu lesson on human anatomy." As Foster contacted his colleague, Dr. Emily Brown, a reproductive biologist, word of the Deltans' discovery spread rapidly among the human officials. Hushed conversations broke out across the beach, with some expressing concern over potential diplomatic fallout, while others saw an opportunity to assert human biological superiority. Meanwhile, Fenris found herself increasingly intrigued by human physiology, particularly Dr. Foster's. She approached him again, this time with more confidence. "Dr. Foster, I'd like to discuss human mating practices in more detail. Would you be willing to have a private conversation?" Foster, acutely aware of the diplomatic tightrope they were walking, nodded cautiously. "Of course, Fenris, but we should have a chaperone present to avoid any misunderstandings." As they made arrangements for their discussion, news of the Deltans' shock spread like wildfire on social media. Hashtags like alien anatomy and human superiority complex trended worldwide, sparking a mix of amusement, concern, and xenophobic reactions among Earth's population. The fate of Earth's standing in the galactic community now hinged on how well they could navigate this unexpected anatomical revelation. As human and Deltan officials huddled in groups along the beach, the air crackled with tension and possibility. The cultural exchange that had begun with such promise now teetered on the edge of disaster, or perhaps a new era of interspecies understanding. As tension crackled through the air on the Hawaiian beach, Dr. Emily Brown's arrival brought a semblance of order to the chaotic scene. Her white lab coat billowed in the salty breeze as she strode purposefully toward the gathered officials, a tablet clutched in her hand. "I've brought the necessary materials for our impromptu lesson," she announced, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We should set up a private area immediately." Within minutes, a large tent materialized on the beach, its white fabric walls offering a shield from prying eyes. Inside, holographic displays flickered to life, projecting three-dimensional images of human anatomy that hovered in the air like ghostly apparitions. The Deltan delegation filed into the tent, their blue skins seeming to pulse with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Fenris, her earlier shock now tempered by scientific interest, positioned herself at the front of the group, her eyes darting between the displays and Dr. Foster. As the tent flap closed, sealing them off from the outside world, Dr. Foster cleared his throat. "Let's begin with the basics of human reproductive anatomy," he said, his tone clinical and detached. He gestured to a holographic image of a human male, rotating it slowly in the air. As Foster described the function and structure of male genitalia, several Deltans shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of fascination and revulsion. Fenris, however, leaned forward, her gaze intense as she absorbed every detail. Dr. Brown stepped in, her voice calm and steady as she took over the presentation. "Now let's discuss the biological processes of human reproduction," she said, manipulating the holographic display to show a detailed animation of fertilization. The Deltans watched in rapt attention, their initial horror gradually giving way to scientific curiosity. Questions began to flow, each more probing than the last, as the aliens grappled with concepts entirely foreign to their species. During a brief recess, Fenris approached Dr. Foster, her earlier fear now replaced by an eager thirst for knowledge. "Dr. Foster," she began, her voice low, "I have some more specific questions about human mating practices. Would you be willing to discuss them?" Foster nodded, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Of course, Fenris. What would you like to know?" As Fenris peppered Foster with questions about human courtship rituals and physical intimacy, neither noticed the commotion growing outside the tent. A crowd had begun to gather, their angry voices carrying over the sound of crashing waves. "Aliens go home," one voice shouted, followed by a chorus of agreement. "Earth for humans," another yelled. Inside the tent, Dr. Brown had resumed the presentation, unaware of the brewing storm outside. She delved into the intricacies of human courtship rituals, explaining concepts of physical attraction and emotional connection. Fenris listened intently, her eyes widening as she recognized parallels between human and Deltan emotional bonds. The fear that had gripped her earlier began to dissolve, replaced by a growing intellectual fascination with human culture. As the lesson concluded, Ambassador Zoral approached Dr. Foster, his face etched with concern. "Dr. Foster," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to discuss the implications of these biological differences on our diplomatic relations. Can we arrange a private meeting with your diplomatic team?" Before Foster could respond, a commotion erupted near the tent entrance. A human male burst through the flap, a small camera in hand. He swiveled, capturing footage of the anatomical holograms and the startled Deltan faces before darting back out into the sunlight. "Stop him!" Foster shouted, but it was too late. The damage was done. Within minutes, the footage began spreading across the internet like wildfire. Social media platforms exploded with activity, humans worldwide engaging in heated debates about the ethics of sharing such sensitive information. Outside the tent, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The crowd of protesters had swelled, now joined by counter-protesters supporting the alien visitors. Local police struggled to maintain order, forming a protective barrier around the tent. Overwhelmed by the day's events, Fenris slipped away from the group, seeking solitude in a quiet corner of the beach. She stared out at the ocean, its vast expanse reminding her of the gulf between her world and this strange, fascinating planet. Dr. Foster approached cautiously, concern etched on his face. "Fenris, are you all right?" She turned to him, her expression a complex mix of emotions. I'm not sure," she admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about your species has been upended, and yet I find myself more curious than ever." Foster nodded understandingly. "It's a lot to process, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to continue our discussions in a less formal setting." As night fell, casting long shadows across the beach, the Deltan delegation prepared to depart. Ambassador Zoral conferred quietly with Senior Ambassador Marcus Wright, their hushed tones betraying the gravity of the situation. Fenris watched as her fellow Deltans boarded their sleek spacecraft, indecision warring within her. Suddenly, she made up her mind. Approaching Ambassador Zoral, she spoke in quick, urgent tones, gesturing emphatically. After a moment's hesitation, Zoral nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. Fenris's face lit up with excitement as she turned back to Dr. Foster. The Deltan spacecraft hummed to life, its engines casting an ethereal glow across the darkened beach. Fenris stood beside Foster, watching as her people departed without her. She turned to the human scientist, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Well, Dr. Foster," she said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips, "it seems I have much to learn about your world. Where do we begin?" As the spacecraft disappeared into the night sky, leaving Fenris behind on Earth, the beach buzzed with activity. Police continued to manage the crowds, government officials huddled in tense discussions, and social media platforms overflowed with speculation about the day's events. Amidst the chaos, Fenris and Dr. Foster stood side by side, gazing up at the stars. The cultural exchange that had begun with such promise, then teetered on the brink of disaster, now balanced on a knife's edge. The true impact of this unprecedented day was yet to unfold, its repercussions stretching far beyond the shores of this Hawaiian beach. The true impact of this unprecedented day was yet to unfold, its repercussions stretching far beyond the shores of this Hawaiian paradise. As dawn broke the following morning, Fenris found herself standing before the imposing gates of the Global Institute for Interspecies Studies, GIIS. The facility's sleek architecture contrasted sharply with the lush tropical landscape surrounding it. Dr. Foster placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the security checkpoint. "This will be your home for the foreseeable future," he explained, leading her down a pristine corridor. "We've arranged for you to have your own living quarters, as well as access to our state-of-the-art research facilities." Fenris nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the array of advanced equipment lining the walls. Holographic displays flickered to life as they passed, showing complex diagrams of various alien anatomies. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with a tall, athletic man in his mid-40s. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his piercing green eyes held a spark of intelligence. "Ah, Dr. Foster," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "I see our guest has arrived." Dr. Foster smiled. "Fenris, allow me to introduce Dr. James Carter, the lead researcher here at GIIS, and an expert in comparative alien physiology. He'll be overseeing your research program during your stay." Dr. Carter extended his hand, then quickly retracted it, remembering the cultural differences. Instead, he offered a slight bow. "Welcome to GIIS, Fenris. We're honored to have you here." Fenris returned the gesture, her blue skin shimmering under the facility's lights. "Thank you, Dr. Carter. I look forward to learning more about human biology and culture." As Dr. Carter began outlining the research program he had designed for Fenris, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the facility's reinforced windows, they could see a growing crowd of protesters gathering at the gates. "Anti-alien groups," Dr. Foster explained, his brow furrowing. "They've been stirred up by that leaked video from yesterday's anatomy lesson." Dr. Carter's expression hardened. "We'll need to increase security measures. Fenris, I'm afraid this might limit your ability to explore human culture freely, at least for now." Fenris nodded, a mix of disappointment and understanding crossing her features. "I appreciate your concern for my safety. Perhaps we can focus on the research aspects for now." "Excellent idea," Dr. Carter agreed. "Let's start with a comprehensive medical examination to compare Deltan and human physiology." Over the next few hours, Fenris underwent a battery of tests. She lay still as advanced scanning equipment mapped her internal organs, her blue skin contrasting starkly with the white medical bay. Dr. Carter explained each procedure, his voice a mix of scientific curiosity and gentle reassurance. "Now, Fenris," Dr. Carter said as they reviewed the results, "one of the most significant differences between our species is sexual dimorphism. Humans have distinct male and female forms, each with specialized reproductive organs." Fenris leaned in, studying the holographic displays with rapt attention. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Deltans have a single reproductive system. This level of specialization is unexpected." As the day progressed, Dr. Foster introduced Fenris to various aspects of human culture. In the facility's recreation room, he showed her how to operate a viewing screen, queuing up a selection of romantic comedies. Fenris watched, alternately amused and perplexed, as human couples on screen engaged in elaborate courtship rituals. She peppered Dr. Foster with questions about dating etiquette, social norms, and the significance of physical affection. Dr. Foster, Fenris said during a pause between films, these mating rituals seem incredibly complex. How do humans navigate such intricate social expectations? Foster chuckled. It's not always easy, Fenris. Humans spend a lifetime learning these skills, but perhaps some first-hand observation would be helpful. Dr. Carter and I have been discussing the possibility of a chaperoned outing. The next day, despite the security concerns, Fenris found herself walking through the doors of a bustling shopping mall. Dr. Foster and Dr. Carter flanked her, their eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. Fenris's gaze darted from store to store, taking in the riot of colors, sounds, and smells. She watched as human couples strolled hand in hand, some exchanging quick kisses. Dr. Foster, she whispered, her voice a mix of fascination and discomfort. Why are those humans pressing their mouths together? Before Foster could respond, a voice cut through the ambient noise of the mall. It's the alien. She doesn't belong here. Dr. Carter's hand closed around Fenris's arm. Time to go, he said urgently, guiding her towards the exit as a group of protesters began to form. Back at the facility, Dr. Carter initiated a new phase of Fenris's research, focusing on human reproduction and sexuality. He presented her with detailed anatomical models, explaining the intricacies of human mating processes. As days turned into weeks, Fenris found her initial fear of human reproductive methods giving way to scientific curiosity. She began to see the beauty in the biological differences between humans and Deltans, her appreciation growing with each new discovery. One evening, as Fenris and Dr. Foster shared a meal in the facility's cafeteria, she broached a subject that had been on her mind. Dr. Foster, she began, her tone hesitant, I find myself developing a deeper appreciation for human physiology and culture. I think I'd like to experience more personal interactions with humans, beyond this clinical setting. Foster nodded thoughtfully. I'll speak with Ambassador Wright. Perhaps we can arrange for a more immersive cultural exchange program. Days later, Fenris stood before a full-length mirror in her quarters, adjusting the folds of an elegant earth gown. The upcoming diplomatic dinner represented a significant step in her journey of understanding human culture. As she studied her reflection, a mix of excitement and nervousness played across her features. The gown's fabric shimmered against her blue skin, a visual representation of the merging of two worlds. Unbeknownst to Fenris, beyond the secure walls of GIIS, a group of anti-alien extremists huddled around a computer screen. Lines of code scrolled past as they infiltrated the facility's security system, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the monitor. We're in, one of them announced, a grim smile spreading across his face. Now we can show these aliens and their sympathizers what real humans think of their so-called cultural exchange. As Fenris made her final preparations for the dinner, the stage was set for a clash that could unravel all the progress made in human-Deltan relations. The peaceful night air outside GIIS belied the tension building within, a stark reminder that the path to understanding between species was fraught with unforeseen challenges. As Fenris made her final preparations for the dinner, the stage was set for a clash that could unravel all the progress made in human-Deltan relations. The peaceful night air outside GIIS belied the tension building within, a stark reminder that the path to understanding between species was fraught with unforeseen challenges. Hours later, Fenris found herself standing at the entrance of a grand ballroom in Washington, D.C. The opulent surroundings were a far cry from the sterile environment of GIIS. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled dignitaries, their formal attire a sea of black and white against which Fenris's blue skin stood out vividly. Dr. Foster placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Remember, you're here as a cultural ambassador. Just be yourself. Fenris nodded, smoothing down her shimmering gown. As they entered the ballroom, heads turned, conversations hushed. Senior Ambassador Marcus Wright approached, his smile warm and welcoming. Fenris, welcome, he said, bowing slightly. Allow me to introduce you to some of our guests. Over the next hour, Fenris found herself engaged in a whirlwind of introductions and conversations. She discussed Earth's geological history with a prominent climatologist, debated the merits of various human art forms with a curator from the Smithsonian, and even attempted a few steps of a waltz with a patient diplomat. As dinner was announced, Fenris took her seat next to a man with salt and pepper hair and piercing green eyes. He turned to her, extending his hand. "Dr. Alexander Roberts," he introduced himself, his voice deep and resonant. "I've been looking forward to meeting you, Fenris. Your presence here is a milestone in interspecies relations." Fenris inclined her head, recalling her lessons on human etiquette. "The honor is mine, Dr. Roberts. I understand you're a geneticist." As they conversed, Fenris found herself drawn in by Roberts's charisma and intellect. He explained his work on interspecies compatibility with passion, his eyes lighting up as he described the possibilities. "Imagine," he said, leaning in slightly, "a future where humans and Deltans could truly understand each other on a biological level. The potential for medical breakthroughs alone is staggering." Fenris nodded, her own excitement growing. "The differences in our physiologies are fascinating. I've been studying human reproductive methods, and—" She broke off, noticing a subtle change in Dr. Roberts' demeanor. His pupils had dilated, and a thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. Fenris frowned, recalling her lessons on human biology. These were signs of arousal, but why now? Glancing around the room, she noticed similar reactions in other male attendees. Some were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, while others were casting furtive glances at their female companions. Dr. Roberts cleared his throat, his voice slightly strained. "I apologize, Fenris. I'm feeling a bit warm. Perhaps it's the wine." But Fenris knew it wasn't the wine. As the main course was served, the situation escalated. She noticed visible bulges in the trousers of several male guests, including Dr. Roberts. The memory of her initial shock at the beach came flooding back, threatening to undo months of progress in accepting human physiology. Across the room, security personnel were conferring in hushed tones, their expressions grim. Fenris caught snippets of their conversation. Pheromones, ventilation system, sabotage. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Some men excused themselves hastily, while others struggled visibly to control their reactions. Women looked on in confusion and embarrassment. Overwhelmed, Fenris retreated to a quiet corner of the ballroom. She found herself trembling, her mind racing with questions and doubts about human nature. Dr. Foster found her there, his face etched with concern. "Fenris, I'm so sorry. This isn't normal human behavior. We've been attacked." He explained about the pheromone device, the work of anti-alien extremists. "What you're seeing is artificially induced. It doesn't represent typical human mating practices." As the effects of the pheromones began to dissipate, Ambassador Wright took to the podium. His voice was steady, but Fenris could detect an undercurrent of anger. "Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests," he began, "I must apologize for this unfortunate incident. Rest assured, we will find those responsible and bring them to justice." He turned to Fenris, his expression softening. "Fenris, your composure in the face of this attack is commendable. Let this incident not overshadow the spirit of cooperation and understanding that brought us together tonight." As the dinner concluded, Fenris found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. The incident had rekindled some of her initial fears about human sexuality, yet she was impressed by how quickly the humans had regained control of the situation. Back at the GIS facility, Fenris stood at the window of her quarters, her gaze fixed on the stars. The events of the evening played through her mind, each recollection bringing with it a new question, a new avenue of inquiry. She turned to Dr. Foster and Dr. Carter, who had been quietly conferring in the corner. "I want to understand more," she said, her voice firm, "about human arousal, about the connection between physical reactions and emotions. It's crucial to fully comprehending human mating methods." Dr. Carter nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We can design a new research protocol. This incident, while regrettable, has provided us with unique data on human physiological responses to external stimuli." As they discussed the possibilities, news broke on the viewing screen. The anti-alien group responsible for the attack had been identified, led by a former military officer named Jack Hawkins. Their faces flashed across the screen as the announcer detailed the ongoing manhunt. Fenris watched, her scientific curiosity piqued once again. The incident, embarrassing as it was, had opened up new avenues of research. She found herself eager to delve deeper into the complexities of human physiology and behavior under extreme circumstances. As the night wore on, Fenris's initial terror gave way to a complex mix of emotions, lingering apprehension, growing curiosity, and a newfound commitment. The path ahead promised both challenges and revelations, a deeper, more personal exploration of human sexuality. She turned back to the window, her reflection overlaying the starry sky. The events of the evening had set the stage for a new chapter in her research, one that would push the boundaries of her understanding and challenge her preconceptions. As she stood there, poised on the brink of this new phase, Fenris felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. The journey of discovery was just the beginning. Beginning a new phase in her journey of understanding human sexuality and relationships. Over the following weeks, the GIIS facility buzzed with renewed activity. Dr. Carter, driven by the unexpected data from the pheromone incident, designed a comprehensive research program to explore human sexuality in greater depth. Fenris found herself at the center of this initiative, her initial apprehension giving way to scientific curiosity. Today we'll be observing a consensual interaction between two volunteers, Dr. Carter explained, leading Fenris into a specially prepared observation room. Remember, Fenris, this is a controlled environment. The participants are fully aware of your presence and have agreed to be part of this study. Fenris nodded, her eyes fixed on the two-way mirror separating them from the adjoining room. A young couple entered, their body language a mix of nervousness and excitement. As they began to interact, Fenris watched intently, noting every subtle touch, every change in facial expression. "Fascinating," she murmured, observing the rapid dilation of the male's pupils as the female leaned in close. "The physiological responses are so immediate." Dr. Carter nodded, making notes on his tablet. Indeed, human arousal involves a complex interplay of visual, olfactory, and tactile stimuli. It's quite different from Deltan mating practices, isn't it? Fenris tilted her head, considering. Yes, but I'm beginning to see a certain elegance in it, the subtlety of the cues, the gradual buildup of tension. It's almost like a dance. As the weeks progressed, Fenris's understanding deepened. She pored over data from various experiments, correlating physical responses with emotional states. One afternoon, she found herself in a lab, electrodes attached to the temples of a male volunteer as he viewed a series of images on a screen. "Now pay attention to the spike in oxytocin levels," Dr. Carter pointed out, gesturing to a graph on the monitor. "This corresponds with images of romantic couples, not just sexually provocative ones." Fenris leaned in, her eyes widening. So human mating isn't purely about physical reproduction? There's an emotional component as well? Exactly, Dr. Carter smiled. For many humans, emotional connection is just as important as physical attraction, sometimes even more so. This revelation sparked a new avenue of inquiry for Fenris. She began interviewing couples, delving into the emotional aspects of human relationships. Each conversation added layers to her understanding, painting a picture of human mating that was far more complex and nuanced than she had initially believed. One evening, Dr. Foster approached Fenris as she was reviewing her notes. "I think it's time we moved your research out of the lab," he suggested. "How would you like to observe human social interactions in a more natural setting?" The next weekend found Fenris standing nervously in Dr. Foster's living room, surrounded by chattering humans. She tugged at the hem of her borrowed dress, feeling oddly exposed without her usual facility uniform. "Relax," Dr. Foster murmured, handing her a glass of wine. "Just observe and interact naturally. Remember, these are all colleagues who know about your research." As the evening progressed, Fenris found herself drawn into conversations, her initial awkwardness fading. She watched, fascinated, as a young man used humor to capture the attention of a woman across the room. In another corner, a couple stood close together, their bodies angled towards each other in a clear display of mutual interest. "Having fun?" a deep voice asked. Fenris turned to find Dr. Alexander Roberts smiling at her. "Dr. Roberts," she greeted him, feeling an unexpected flutter in her chest. Yes, it's quite illuminating. Human social gatherings are more complex than I realized. Roberts chuckled. Please, call me Alex. And yes, we humans do like to complicate things. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to apologize for my behavior at the diplomatic dinner. That pheromone attack was embarrassing, to say the least. Fenris felt her skin warm, remembering the incident. No apology necessary. It's provided valuable data for my research. Ah, yes, your research. Alex leaned in, his eyes sparkling with interest. I'd love to hear more about it. In fact, I've been working on some theories about interspecies compatibility that might interest you. As they talked, Fenris found herself captivated not just by the content of their conversation, but by Alex's animated expressions, the way his hand occasionally brushed her arm as he made a point. She realized with a jolt of surprise that she was experiencing firsthand the subtle dance of human courtship she had been studying. Across the room, Tom Wilson, a lab technician Fenris vaguely recognized, watched the interaction with keen interest. Excusing himself from a conversation, he stepped out onto the patio, pulling out a communicator. Boss, you're going to want to hear this, he muttered into the device. The alien's adapting faster than we thought. She's not just studying human mating behaviors anymore. She's starting to engage in them. Miles away, Jack Hawkins received the message, his face hardening into a scowl. This is moving too fast, he growled to his assembled lieutenants. We need to accelerate our plans. The alien threat is no longer just physical. They're trying to integrate on an intimate level. We can't allow that to happen. As the party wound down, Fenris found herself filled with a new sense of excitement and purpose. The next morning, she strode into Dr. Carter's office, her mind made up. Dr. Carter, she announced, I want to take my research to the next level. I propose a series of supervised dating scenarios with human volunteers. It's time I experience these interactions firsthand. Dr. Carter's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He studied Fenris for a long moment, noting the commitment in her eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, Fenris. I'll design a protocol, but we'll need to be very careful about selecting volunteers and setting boundaries. As Dr. Carter began outlining the parameters of this new experiment, Fenris felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She was about to embark on the most personal phase of her research yet, one that would challenge not just her scientific understanding, but her own emotions and preconceptions. Little did she know that as she prepared to delve deeper into human intimacy, forces were aligning against her. In a hidden bunker, Jack Hawkins and his followers were finalizing plans that would shake the foundations of human-Deltan relations. The stage was set for a clash between growing understanding and entrenched fear, with Fenris caught in the middle of a storm she couldn't yet see coming. The morning after Dr. Foster's party, Fenris strode into Dr. Carter's office with newfound purpose. Her experiences at the social gathering had ignited a desire to delve deeper into the intricacies of human courtship. Dr. Carter, she announced, I want to take my research to the next level. I propose a series of supervised dating scenarios with human volunteers. It's time I experience these interactions firsthand. Dr. Carter's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He studied Fenris for a long moment, noting the perseverance in her eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, Fenris, I'll design a protocol, but we'll need to be very careful about selecting volunteers and setting boundaries. Over the next few days, Dr. Carter and his team worked diligently to create a safe, controlled environment for Fenris to explore human dating rituals. They carefully vetted potential candidates, eventually selecting Michael Brown, a 28-year-old marine biologist, as Fenris's first date. On the evening of the experiment, Fenris stood before a mirror in her quarters, adjusting the collar of her blouse. Her antennae twitched nervously as she smoothed down her hair, a human gesture she had observed and adopted. Remember, Dr. Carter said, standing in the doorway, this is still a research exercise. Observe, interact, but maintain your scientific objectivity. Fenris nodded, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. Understood, Doctor. I'm ready. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of conversation and the clink of cutlery against plates. Fenris sat across from Michael, her back straight, hands folded neatly on the table. She watched him intently, noting how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he gestured animatedly when talking about his work with marine mammals. "So Fenris," Michael said, leaning forward slightly, "what made you interested in studying human behavior?" Fenris paused, considering her words carefully. "The complexity of your species fascinates me, particularly your mating rituals. They're so varied and nuanced compared to Deltan practices." Michael chuckled, a warm sound that sent an unexpected flutter through Fenris's chest. "Well, I hope we're not disappointing you with our messy, complicated ways." As the evening progressed, Fenris found herself relaxing, her initial stiffness giving way to a more natural posture. She mimicked Michael's body language, leaning in when he spoke, nodding at appropriate intervals. The conversation flowed easily from topic to topic, touching on their shared interest in Earth's oceans. "The bioluminescent algae off the coast of Puerto Rico is truly spectacular," Michael was saying, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "Have you ever seen anything like that on Delta?" Fenris opened her mouth to respond, but her words were cut short by a sudden commotion at the restaurant's entrance. The door burst open, and a group of masked individuals stormed in, brandishing weapons. "Nobody move!" a gruff voice commanded. Fenris recognized it immediately. Jack Hawkins. Chaos erupted in the restaurant. Patrons screamed and ducked under tables. In the confusion, Fenris caught sight of Dr. Carter at a nearby table, reaching for a concealed communicator. Before he could activate it, one of Hawkins' men struck him, sending the device skittering across the floor. Michael's hand closed around Fenris's wrist. "Stay close," he murmured, his eyes scanning the room for an escape route. Hawkins strode purposefully through the panicked crowd, his gaze fixed on Fenris. "There you are, alien," he growled, reaching for her. In a blur of motion, Michael placed himself between Fenris and Hawkins. "Back off," he warned, his voice low and steady. Fenris stared at Michael's back, marveling at this display of protective behavior. It was so different from the calculated, self-preserving responses she was accustomed to on Delta. Hawkins sneered, gesturing to his men. "How noble! Take them both!" As rough hands grabbed at her, Fenris's scientific mind kicked into overdrive, cataloging every sensation, every reaction. The surge of adrenaline, the quickening of her pulse, were these the physical manifestations of fear that humans so often described? A loud crash from the kitchen interrupted the chaos. James Rodriguez, the head chef, emerged wielding a large cast-iron skillet. "Not in my restaurant, you don't," he growled, swinging the improvised weapon at the nearest attacker. Other staff members followed his lead, arming themselves with kitchen implements. Fenris watched in amazement as waiters wielded rolling pins and sous chefs brandished cleavers, forming a protective circle around the patrons. In the midst of the melee, Fenris found herself separated from Michael. Hawkins seized the opportunity, grabbing her arm and dragging her towards the exit. "You're coming with us, alien," he hissed. "It's time humanity learned the truth about your kind." As they neared the door, a new voice cut through the din. "FBI, everyone freeze!" Special Agent Marcus Donovan stood in the doorway, flanked by a tactical team. His gaze locked onto Hawkins, who immediately pulled Fenris in front of him as a shield. "Let her go, Hawkins," Donovan called out, his voice calm but authoritative. "There's no way out of this." Fenris felt Hawkins's grip tighten on her arm. She could sense the rapid rise and fall of his chest against her back, smell the acrid scent of his sweat. These physical cues, she realized, were signs of his increasing desperation. As Donovan attempted to negotiate, Fenris observed the complex interplay of dominance, submission, and strategic thinking. It was a far cry from the straightforward confrontations she had witnessed on Delta. Suddenly, a blur of motion caught her eye. Michael had managed to circle behind them, unnoticed in the chaos. He locked eyes with Fenris for a brief moment, a silent communication passing between them. In one swift motion, Michael knocked over a nearby table. The loud crash startled Hawkins, loosening his grip just enough for Fenris to wrench herself free. As she stumbled forward, a deafening boom shook the restaurant. Heat seared her back as she was thrown to the ground, debris raining down around her. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the terrified screams of the other patrons. When the dust settled, Fenris found herself trapped in a small pocket of space. The restaurant's collapsed structure forming a protective cocoon around her. Beside her, she felt a warm presence. "Are you okay?" Michael's voice was strained but steady. Fenris turned to face him in the dim light. "Yes, I think so. You protected me again." Michael's hand found hers in the darkness. "That's what humans do for people we care about," he said softly. As they lay there waiting for rescue, Fenris felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat from the explosion. She began to understand that human mating behaviors extended far beyond the physical act of reproduction. They encompassed protection, sacrifice, and a deep emotional connection that she was only beginning to comprehend. The sound of shifting rubble reached their ears, followed by muffled voices. "We're picking up life signs," a rescuer called out. "They're alive in there." As the rescue operation continued, Fenris's mind raced with new questions and insights. This harrowing experience had opened up avenues of research she had never considered before. The complex interplay of fear, attraction, and protective instincts in crisis situations fascinated her. She turned to Michael, his face barely visible in the gloom. "When we get out of here," she said, her voice filled with new perseverance, "I would very much like to continue our date." Michael's surprised laugh echoed in their small sanctuary. "I'd like that too," he replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. As the sounds of the rescue team grew closer, Fenris realized that her understanding of human mating methods had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a purely academic pursuit. She had experienced firsthand the emotional depths and physical risks humans were willing to undertake for potential mates. The first beam of light broke through the debris, illuminating their small space. As rescue workers called out reassurances, Fenris knew that her research and her personal journey had entered a new, exciting phase. The complex dance of human courtship, with all its danger and beauty, was only beginning to reveal itself to her. As the dust settled and the rescue teams cleared away the last of the debris, Fenris found herself reevaluating her entire approach to studying human mating practices. The intensity of the attack and Michael's protective instincts had opened her eyes to aspects of human behavior she had never fully grasped before. In the days that followed, Dr. Carter and his team worked tirelessly to secure the GIIS facility against further cyber threats. Fenris noticed an increased security presence and stricter protocols being implemented throughout the complex. She couldn't shake the feeling that her research, and perhaps her very presence on Earth, had become a lightning rod for controversy. One evening, as Fenris pored over her data in the lab, Dr. Carter entered with a grave expression on his face. "Fenris, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. "Recent events have made it clear that your safety here is compromised. We've decided to relocate you to a more secure location." Fenris's antennae twitched in surprise. "Relocate? But my work—" "Will continue," Dr. Carter assured her. "We've prepared a state-of-the-art research outpost in the Rocky Mountains. It's isolated, well-equipped, and most importantly, safe." As Fenris absorbed this news, she felt a mix of apprehension and excitement. The prospect of leaving the familiar confines of the GIIS facility was daunting, but the potential for new experiences and data was undeniable. The journey to the mountain outpost was long and winding. As their vehicle climbed higher into the Rockies, Fenris pressed her face against the window, marveling at the rugged landscape. Snow-capped peaks pierced the sky, and dense forests blanketed the slopes. It was a far cry from the urban environment she had grown accustomed to. Upon arrival, Fenris was introduced to Dr. Eric Stanson, the lead researcher at the facility. His weathered face and piercing blue eyes spoke of years spent in this harsh environment. He greeted Fenris with a firm handshake, his grip strong and calloused. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere," Dr. Stanson said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I hope you're ready for some real science up here." As Dr. Stanson led her on a tour of the facility, Fenris couldn't help but notice the efficient layout and cutting-edge equipment. The laboratories were compact but well-stocked, and the living quarters, while sparse, offered breathtaking views of the surrounding wilderness. "Your arrival has caused quite a stir," Dr. Stanson commented as they entered the main research lab. Not every day we get to work with an extraterrestrial behavioral scientist. Fenris detected a note of skepticism in his voice. I assure you, Dr. Stanson, my methods are rigorous and my findings valuable. I'm here to learn, not to disrupt your work. Dr. Stanson's expression softened slightly. Fair enough. Let's see what you've got. Over the next few weeks, Fenris immersed herself in her research, designing new experiments to explore the nuances of human courtship and intimacy. Dr. Stanson, initially wary, found himself drawn into her unique perspective on human behavior. One afternoon, as they prepared for an experiment on pheromone responses, Fenris noticed Dr. Stanson watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You know, he said, breaking the silence, your approach to studying us is refreshing. You see things we often overlook. Fenris felt an unexpected warmth at his words. Thank you. I find humans endlessly fascinating. There's so much complexity in your interactions. As they worked side by side, Fenris became increasingly aware of Dr. Stanson's presence. The way he moved, the timbre of his voice, the faint scent of pine that clung to his clothes, all of it registered in her senses with startling clarity. Their next experiment involved measuring heart rate and hormone levels during close physical proximity. As Fenris attached the sensors to Dr. Stanson's chest, she felt her own pulse quicken. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with an unfamiliar energy. The data from the experiment was revealing, but it was Fenris's own reaction that truly surprised her. The surge of emotions she experienced when in close contact with Dr. Stanson was unlike anything she had encountered in her previous studies. It left her questioning the objectivity of her research and the nature of her own feelings. As Fenris grappled with these new emotions, the outside world intruded on their isolated haven. Special Agent Marcus Donovan arrived at the facility, his face grim with news of a potential security breach. We've uncovered evidence of a mole within the GIIS, Donovan explained during a tense meeting with the research team. There's a chance that sensitive information about Fenris's location may have been compromised. Before they could fully process this information, nature intervened. A severe snowstorm descended upon the mountain, cutting off all communication and access to the outside world. The facility, designed to be self-sufficient, hunkered down to weather the storm. Forced into close quarters, Fenris found herself thrust into the heart of human social dynamics. She shared meals with the team, participated in improvised game nights, and engaged in late-night conversations that ranged from scientific theories to personal philosophies. Dr. Stanson, in particular, seemed to seek out her company. One evening, as they sat by a window watching the storm rage outside, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. You know, Fenris, I've been thinking about your research. Have you considered that maybe the key to understanding human mating isn't just in the physical acts, but in moments like these? The shared experiences, the connection formed in adversity? Fenris pondered his words, feeling as though she was on the brink of a significant breakthrough in her understanding. Before she could respond, the lights flickered and died, plunging the facility into darkness. Power failure, Dr. Stanson said, his voice calm in the sudden gloom. We need to check the environmental control systems. Come on, I could use your help. As they made their way through the darkened corridors, Fenris felt a new awareness of Dr. Stanson's presence. The sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body as they navigated the tight spaces. It all seemed amplified in the darkness. They reached the control room where Dr. Stanson began working on the malfunctioning equipment. Fenris assisted, handing him tools and holding a flashlight. As they worked in the confined space, their bodies frequently brushed against each other, sending unexpected shivers through Fenris's form. Suddenly, the machinery sparked to life, startling them both. Dr. Stanson stumbled, colliding with Fenris. His arms instinctively wrapped around her to steady them both, and for a moment they stood there, pressed together in the dim emergency lighting. Fenris felt her heart racing, her skin tingling where it contacted his. She looked up into Dr. Stanson's eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. A mix of surprise, curiosity, and something deeper, more primal. As they slowly disentangled themselves, Fenris realized that her understanding of human mating practices had fundamentally shifted. It wasn't just about biological processes or social rituals. It was about connection, shared experiences, and the ineffable spark that could ignite between two beings in moments of vulnerability and closeness. The power flickered back to life, illuminating the room and the new awareness that had dawned between them. As they made their way back to the main living area, Fenris knew that her research and her personal journey had entered uncharted territory. The storm outside mirrored the tumult of emotions within her, promising further challenges and discoveries in the days to come. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the snow-capped peaks, Fenris stood at the window of the research outpost, her antennae twitching with nervous energy. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptively serene landscape. But the calm was illusory. Danger approached. "Fenris, we need to move," Dr. Eric Stanson's voice broke through her reverie. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his face etched with concern and drive. "Of course," she replied, following him to the main laboratory. The facility buzzed with activity as researchers and security personnel rushed to prepare for the impending attack. Dr. Stanson led Fenris to a workstation where sensitive equipment and data drives were being packed into reinforced cases. "We need to secure all our research," he explained, his hands moving swiftly over delicate instruments. "If Hawkins gets his hands on this—" Fenris nodded, understanding the implications. As she worked alongside Dr. Stanson, she couldn't help but notice the way his muscles tensed beneath his shirt, the sharp focus in his eyes. These observations triggered an unexpected physiological response in her own body. Increased heart rate, elevated body temperature, a curious tingling sensation along her skin. Across the room, Special Agent Marcus Donovan conferred with Dr. Carter, gesturing at a holographic display of the facility's layout. "We'll position our security teams here and here," Donovan said, indicating key choke points. "But we're outnumbered. We need every advantage we can get." Dr. Carter nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "We could repurpose some of our lab equipment. The mass spectrometer could be modified to emit a high-frequency sound wave. Not lethal, but highly disorienting." Fenris approached the group, an idea forming in her mind. "If I may," she interjected, "I believe I can synthesize a non-lethal incapacitating agent using compounds from our xenobiology lab. A fog that could disorient and weaken the attackers." Donovan raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Do it," he ordered. "Every little bit helps." As Fenris turned to head to the lab, a violent tremor shook the facility. Alarms blared, and for a heart-stopping moment, everyone froze, certain the attack had begun. "Earthquake!" Dr. Stanson shouted, steadying himself against a workbench. "Everyone, take cover!" The shaking intensified, equipment rattling on shelves and tables. Fenris felt a strong arm wrap around her waist, pulling her under a sturdy desk. She found herself pressed against Dr. Stanson, his body shielding her from falling debris. The closeness sent a jolt through her system, a mix of fear and something else, an unfamiliar yet not unpleasant sensation. As quickly as it began, the quake subsided. In the aftermath, they emerged to assess the damage. The facility had held up well, but outside, the landscape had changed dramatically. "The road," Agent Donovan said, peering through a window. "It's gone. Avalanche." Dr. Stanson's face lit up with an idea. "The weather mod system," he said, turning to Fenris. "We designed it for climate research, but we could use it to create a localized blizzard. Buy us some more time." Fenris nodded, intrigued by the ingenuity. "Show me," she said. They worked side by side, recalibrating the complex machinery. In the close quarters of the control room, Fenris found herself acutely aware of Dr. Stanson's presence. The warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of his skin, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. As they reached for the same control panel, their hands brushed. A spark of electricity seemed to jump between them, causing Fenris to gasp softly. Dr. Stanson paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Fenris," he began, his voice low and husky. But the moment was interrupted by Agent Donovan's voice over the intercom. "We've got movement on the long-range sensors, multiple targets approaching from the south." Reality crashed back in. They shared a look of understanding. Whatever was happening between them would have to wait. There was a battle to prepare for. As they emerged from the control room, they found the facility transformed into a makeshift fortress. Researchers had repurposed lab equipment into defensive tools, creating an array of non-lethal weapons and barriers. Fenris made her way to the xenobiology lab, determined to complete her chemical fog. As she worked, mixing compounds with practiced precision, she found her mind drifting to Dr. Stanson, to the unfamiliar sensations she'd experienced. Was this what human attraction felt like? The thought both excited and terrified her. Outside, the weather modification system roared to life. Through the lab's window, Fenris watched as dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, snow beginning to fall in thick, blinding sheets. She allowed herself a moment of awe at the display of human technological prowess. The intercom crackled again. "They're here!" Donovan's voice was tense but controlled. "Everyone to your positions. This is not a drill." Fenris secured the last canister of her chemical fog and headed to the main atrium. As she moved through the facility, she saw fear on the faces of her human colleagues, but also grit and a fierce protectiveness. These people, who had welcomed her and shared their knowledge, were now preparing to defend her with their lives. The realization filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with physical attraction. She found Dr. Stanson at the main entrance, helping to reinforce the doors. Their eyes met and a wordless communication passed between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The first sounds of combat reached them, muffled explosions and gunfire from the outer perimeter. Fenris felt her hearts racing, her body tensing for action. This was it. The true test of her understanding of human nature was about to begin, not in a controlled laboratory setting, but in the chaotic crucible of conflict. As the defenders braced for the assault, Fenris found herself experiencing a complex mix of emotions: fear, excitement, curiosity, and something deeper, something tied to the humans around her, especially Dr. Stanson. She realized that her journey of understanding human mating methods had led her to this moment, where theory would meet reality in the most extreme circumstances. The main doors shuddered under a heavy impact. The battle for the research outpost, and perhaps for Fenris's future on Earth, was about to begin in earnest. The main doors buckled under another thunderous impact. Fenris, Dr. Stanson, and Agent Donovan exchanged grim looks as they retreated further into the facility. The chemical fog Fenris had created provided some cover, but Hawkins and his men were advancing relentlessly. "To the main lab," Dr. Stanson urged, leading the way through the maze-like corridors. "We can make a stand there." As they entered the laboratory, the sounds of combat grew louder. Fenris's antennae twitched nervously as she took in the room's layout, mentally cataloging potential weapons and defensive positions. Dr. Stanson and Agent Donovan moved swiftly, overturning tables to create barricades and gathering what makeshift weapons they could find. The relative quiet was shattered as the lab's reinforced doors exploded inward. Hawkins and his remaining followers poured into the room, brandishing advanced weaponry. Fenris ducked behind a workstation as energy blasts and gunfire erupted around her. "Fenris, stay down!" Dr. Stanson shouted, returning fire with a repurposed particle accelerator. The air filled with acrid smoke and the ozone smell of energy weapons. Alarms blared, adding to the chaos. Fenris watched in awe as her human companions fought with a ferocity she had never witnessed before. Agent Donovan moved with lethal precision, taking down two of Hawkins' men in quick succession. Suddenly, a stray energy blast struck a nearby shelf, sending various canisters crashing to the floor. One particular container shattered, releasing a thick pinkish mist into the air. Fenris immediately recognized it as an experimental pheromone compound she had been studying. The effect on the humans was almost instantaneous. Hawkins's men lowered their weapons, confusion evident on their faces. Even Agent Donovan and Dr. Stanson seemed affected, their movements becoming less coordinated. "What's happening?" Fenris asked, noticing she remained unaffected. Dr. Stanson, visibly struggling to maintain his focus, managed to explain. "Pheromones, amplifying sexual responses. It's an extreme version of human mating instincts." Fenris watched in fascination as the battle devolved into a scene of confusion and heightened arousal. Hawkins's followers seemed unable to remember why they were fighting, their aggression replaced by a dazed, almost euphoric state. Seizing the opportunity, Agent Donovan shook off the pheromones' influence enough to subdue several of Hawkins' disoriented men. Fenris, her scientific mind racing, realized she had a unique advantage in this situation. "Dr. Stanson," she called out, "I can create a neutralizing agent, but I need your help." Working swiftly, Fenris began mixing chemicals, her knowledge of human and Deltan biology allowing her to formulate an antidote on the fly. Dr. Stanson, still affected but determined, provided cover fire as she worked. As Fenris administered the neutralizing agent to Donovan and Stanson, she experienced a moment of profound insight. Despite the overwhelming biological urges induced by the pheromones, these human males had fought to protect her and each other. It was a vivid demonstration of the complex interplay between human biology and emotion. Just as Fenris finished neutralizing the pheromones' effects on her companions, Hawkins made a desperate lunge towards her. Time seemed to slow as she saw him approaching, weapon raised. But before he could reach her, Dr. Stanson threw himself into Hawkins's path, taking a vicious blow meant for Fenris. The sight of Dr. Stanson falling to the ground, injured but still fighting, stirred something deep within Fenris. It was more than just gratitude. It was a powerful emotional response she had never experienced before. Before Hawkins could press his advantage, the lab doors burst open once again. Dr. Carter led a team of FBI agents into the room, quickly overwhelming the remaining attackers. In the ensuing chaos, Fenris rushed to Dr. Stanson's side, her hearts racing with concern. "Eric," she said, using his first name without realizing it, "are you all right?" He looked up at her, a mix of pain and warmth in his eyes. "I've been better," he managed a weak smile, "but I'd do it again in a heartbeat." As medical teams swarmed the lab, tending to the injured, Fenris found herself unable to leave Dr. Stanson's side. She watched as the humans worked together, their actions driven by a complex mix of duty, compassion, and something else she was just beginning to understand. In the aftermath of the battle, as the facility buzzed with activity and the prisoners were led away, Fenris approached Dr. Carter with a determined look in her eyes. "Dr. Carter," she began, her voice filled with a new confidence, "I would like to request an extension of my stay on Earth, indefinitely if possible." Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow, surprised. "May I ask why?" Fenris glanced over at Dr. Stanson, who was being treated by medics nearby. "My research into human mating practices, I believe it needs to continue, but from a more personal perspective. What I've witnessed here, what I've experienced, it's changed everything. My fear has been replaced by fascination, and She paused, struggling to find the right words. Dr. Carter nodded encouragingly. "I want to understand human emotional and physical intimacy firsthand," Fenris continued. "I believe it's crucial for fostering better understanding between our species." Dr. Carter considered her words carefully, then smiled. "I'll need to discuss this with the GIIS, but given the unique insights you've provided, I think they'll be open to the idea. We might even establish a new research initiative focused on human-Deltan cultural and biological exchange." As the facility began its recovery process, Fenris found herself navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain. Her relationship with Dr. Stanson had shifted, deepened by their shared experiences. She approached him as he rested in the medical bay, her antennae twitching with nervous energy. "Dr. Stanson, Eric," she began, "I wanted to thank you for what you did, and to tell you that I've requested to extend my stay on Earth." He sat up, wincing slightly. "That's wonderful news, Fenris, but why the change of heart?" Fenris took a deep breath, feeling a curious warmth spreading through her body. "I've realized that understanding human mating methods isn't just about biological processes or social rituals. It's about connection, shared experiences, and feelings I'm only beginning to comprehend. I was hoping perhaps you could help me explore these concepts further." Dr. Stanson's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and something else Fenris couldn't quite identify, flashing across his face. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The contact sent a shiver through Fenris's body, a physical manifestation of the emotional whirlwind inside her. "I'd be honored," he said softly. As the sun set behind the snow-capped mountains, Fenris stood at the facility's observation deck, her mind racing with possibilities. Her journey had taken her from terror to fascination, and now to the brink of something entirely new. She knew that her most important discoveries about human intimacy were yet to come, and the thought filled her with equal parts excitement and nervous anticipation. She turned as she heard footsteps approaching, seeing Dr. Stanson join her at the railing. Without a word, he placed his arm around her shoulders, and Fenris leaned into his warmth. Together, they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky, the promise of new discoveries stretching out before them like the vast expanse of the universe. As the weeks passed, the mountain facility gradually returned to normal operations. The damage from Hawkins's attack was repaired, and the research team resumed their work with renewed vigor. For Fenris, however, everything had changed. Her near-death experience and the profound connection she had formed with Dr. Stanson opened up a whole new realm of inquiry into human relationships. Fenris threw herself into her research with unprecedented enthusiasm. She spent countless hours in the lab with Dr. Stanson, analyzing data on human physiology and behavior. Their work sessions often stretched late into the night, fueled by a shared passion for discovery and an undeniable personal chemistry. One evening, as they pored over a particularly intriguing set of data, Fenris found herself distracted by Dr. Stanson's proximity. She observed the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the subtle flex of his muscles as he reached for a tablet. These small details fascinated her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Eric," she said, using his first name with a newfound comfort, "I believe I'm experiencing some unusual physiological responses. My heart rate has increased, and I'm sensing a curious warmth throughout my body." Dr. Stanson looked up, a mix of concern and something else in his eyes. "Are you feeling all right, Fenris?" "I'm not sure," she replied, her antennae twitching slightly. "These sensations seem to correlate with your proximity. Is this normal?" A smile spread across Eric's face. "It sounds like you might be experiencing attraction, Fenris. It's a common human response when we're around someone we care about." Fenris considered this, her scientific mind racing to process this new data. "Fascinating. I'd like to explore this further, if you're amenable." Their research took on a new dimension as they began to investigate the intricacies of human courtship rituals. Fenris experienced her first date at the facility's makeshift cafeteria, carefully noting the social dynamics at play. She learned the art of flirting, at first awkwardly mimicking human behaviors, but gradually developing her own style. As the months passed, Fenris and Eric's relationship deepened. They spent time together outside the lab, hiking in the surrounding mountains and stargazing on clear nights. Fenris found herself captivated by the way moonlight played across Eric's features, how his laughter seemed to resonate within her. Their burgeoning romance didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the research team. Dr. Carter observed their interactions with a mixture of amusement and scientific interest, recognizing the potential implications for human-Deltan relations. One evening, the team gathered to celebrate a breakthrough in their latest project. The atmosphere was jubilant, with music playing and drinks flowing freely. Fenris, still adjusting to the effects of Earth's alcohol on her Deltan physiology, felt a pleasant buzz as she mingled with her colleagues. She found Eric near the window, gazing out at the starlit sky. As she approached, he turned to her with a warm smile that sent a flutter through her hearts. "Beautiful night," he said softly. "Yes," Fenris agreed, her eyes fixed on his face rather than the view. Their eyes met, and Fenris felt an electric charge in the air between them. Without conscious thought, she leaned in closer. Eric's hand came up to gently cup her face, and then their lips met in a kiss. The sensation was unlike anything Fenris had experienced before. It was as if every nerve in her body had suddenly come alive. She felt dizzy, exhilarated, and hungry for more all at once. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Fenris stared at Eric in wonder. "That was intense," she managed to say. Eric chuckled softly. That's one way to put it. As the celebration continued around them, Fenris and Eric found a quiet corner to talk. They discussed their feelings, the implications of their relationship, and their desire to explore this connection further. In the following weeks, their research took on a more personal nature. Fenris experienced the full spectrum of human courtship rituals firsthand. She reveled in the simple pleasure of holding hands, the comfort of cuddling while watching Earth movies, and the thrill of stolen kisses between experiments. As their relationship progressed, Fenris and Eric decided it was time to broaden their research beyond the confines of the mountain facility. They approached Dr. Carter with a proposal for an extended field study, combining their ongoing research with a personal journey of discovery. Dr. Carter, recognizing the potential value of their unique perspective, approved their sabbatical. "This could be groundbreaking," she said. "Your experiences could pave the way for better understanding between our species." With excitement and a touch of nervousness, Fenris and Eric prepared for their journey. They packed their research equipment alongside more personal items, ready to embark on an adventure that would take them across Earth and into uncharted territory in their relationship. As they boarded the transport that would take them from the mountain facility, Fenris looked back at the place that had become her home. She thought about how far she had come since her arrival on Earth, from fear and misunderstanding to love and acceptance. Eric squeezed her hand gently. "Ready for our next big experiment?" he asked with a grin. Fenris nodded, her antennae quivering with anticipation. "I believe I am, though I must admit I'm experiencing some trepidation along with my excitement." "That's normal," Eric assured her. "We're stepping into the unknown together. But isn't that what science is all about?" As the transport lifted off, carrying them towards new horizons, Fenris realized that her greatest discovery was yet to come. She was no longer just an observer of human behavior, but an active participant in a cross-species relationship. The implications were enormous, both personally and scientifically. Their first stop was a small town in the American Midwest, where they would study traditional courtship rituals in a rural setting. As they settled into their temporary lodgings, Fenris felt a mix of excitement and nervousness about the adventure ahead. She knew that each new experience would bring her closer to understanding the complex tapestry of human relationships, and closer to Eric.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.